It was a regular Tuesday night in Manhattan. A popular political talk show was airing live, watched by millions at home. Most expected the usual heated arguments and loud opinions, something to argue about over dinner or share online. No one expected what was about to unfold. The camera panned across the studio, settling on two guests seated at opposite sides of a sleek glass table, a toge. Karoline Leavitt, sharp-tongued, confident, always ready with a biting comment, had built her reputation as someone who didn't back down, someone who spoke hard truths no matter who it hurt. Across from her sat a quiet but focused man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader of Burkina Faso. He wasn't flashy, didn't play to the crowd. His suit was plain, his eyes steady. He carried the kind of calm that made people uncomfortable, the kind that says, "I've seen worse than this." The topic of the night was America's role in West Africa military bases, foreign aid, and what some call modern colonialism. The moderator opened the floor, keeping things neutral. Traoré leaned forward slightly, his voice low but clear. He began to speak about independence, respect, and the weight of history, not as a victim, but as a leader. That's when it happened. Karoline leaned in, pointed a finger at him, and snapped, "Sit down, boy." The words hit like a slap. The studio froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the cameras seemed to pause. But Traoré didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her, calm, unbothered. And somehow, that silence screamed louder than any reply. The screen faded to black. What came next didn't just break the internet, it broke something much deeper. Within minutes of Karoline Leavitt's words echoing across the studio, "Sit down." Boy, the internet lit up like a wildfire. Clips from the broadcast spread faster than most breaking news. The hashtags took off within the hour. Hashtag stand with Traore. Hashtag boy is power. Hashtag respect, dignity. Millions shared their disbelief, their anger, their heartbreak. The phrase, so short and sharp, carried the weight of a much longer story of history that refused to stay silent. Newsrooms scrambled. Some anchors stumbled over their words, unsure how to frame it. Was it just a heated moment, or something deeper? Was this about race, about respect, about old wounds still bleeding in public view? Everyone had questions, but few had answers. Karoline didn't flinch. Not in the studio, and not in the hours after. On her social media, she posted a short video. "I speak plainly. That's what real Americans want. I won't apologize for telling the truth." Her tone was cold, confident, calculated. Behind her words, her political team scrambled to control the damage. They tried spinning it. She was standing up for American values. She challenged foreign interference. But most people weren't buying it. Veterans groups spoke out first, then civil rights leaders, then everyday people, teachers, nurses, high school students who had never heard of Burkina Faso before that night but understood exactly what they had seen. "It's not about where he's from," one viral tweet read. "It's about what was said and what it really meant." Through all this, Captain Ibrahim Traoré said nothing. He turned down every interview, ignored every headline. When a reporter finally reached him for a comment, he posted only 7 words to his account. "Dignity doesn't yell, it listens." That silence said more than any speech could. It threw people off. In a media world built on shouting, his quiet made people lean in. It wasn't just the silence that made him different, it was the peace in it. Talk shows couldn't get enough. Some conservative hosts mocked him. Another snowflake playing the victim. If he can't handle the heat, get off the stage. Others tried to drag him into their own agendas. On the other side, progressive voices spoke with fire, calling out the long history of Black and African men being diminished, spoken over, or reduced with the same word, boy. But no matter where people stood politically, they knew something had happened, something real, something raw, and it wasn't going away. Pressure kept building. Protests began forming outside network studios. Handwritten signs read, "He's not a boy, he's a nation." Students wore Traoré's quote on T-shirts. Artists began painting murals of his face with bold captions like "Silence can roar" and "Power doesn't always shout." He had become something more than a man. He had become a symbol. Karoline's situation got worse. At first, her team dismissed the backlash. They thought it would pass. But as days went by, the heat didn't cool. She started receiving threats, both online and in person. Her offices increased security. Her public appearances were cut back. Then her staff started leaking. She was angry. Behind closed doors, not at herself, but at the world for turning on her. Meanwhile, Captain Traoré stayed quiet. He turned down CNN, MSNBC, even BBC. He refused to go on the late shows, despite being offered record viewer slots. People begged him to speak again, and that longing made his silence louder. Rumors spread. Was he afraid? Was he planning something big? But those who knew him said the same thing. He speaks when it matters, and only when it matters. In the streets, his name became a chant. In classrooms, teachers used the moment to talk about history, power, and respect. Some called it the slap that wasn't physical but shook a country. Others called it the moment America looked in the mirror. But through all the noise, the most striking part was what didn't happen. Traoré never clapped back, never insulted Karoline, never tried to win the internet. And yet, the world was watching him, not her. Because deep down, people knew what they saw. They didn't see a fight between two politicians. They saw a man who had carried pain quietly, being told to sit down, like he didn't matter. And they saw what real strength looks like when it doesn't flinch and doesn't have to fight back to win. 1 week later, the chairs were set again. Same studio. Same table. Same lights. But nothing felt the same. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had accepted a single invitation to return to the very place where it all started. This time, there was a live audience. You could feel the weight in the air. People didn't just come to watch a debate. They came to witness something they couldn't explain but knew they needed to see. Karoline Leavitt was already seated when he walked in. She looked polished, poised, trying hard to look unbothered. But her eyes told a different story. Not fear exactly, but tension. The kind that comes when the spotlight doesn't feel so friendly anymore. Traoré walked in with quiet steps. No entourage, no notes, just presence. He sat across from her, the same seat as last time. The moderator welcomed him briefly, then turned straight to the question everyone knew was coming. Captain Traoré. The host said carefully, "Do you have anything you'd like to say to Ms. Leavitt?" There was a pause. A long one. He didn't turn to her. He looked at the audience. The cameras zoomed in, but his eyes didn't search for them. They stayed fixed on the crowd in front of him. His voice was steady, soft, but not weak. "Where I'm from," he said, "boys become men. When they bury their fathers, there's no flag, no cameras, just dust and grief. Not a sound in the room." He went on, no raised voice, no anger. "We don't grow up watching cartoons. We grow up watching our villages burn. Our classrooms don't have lights, only candlelight. Some of us studied with smoke in our lungs. Some never made it home." Each line landed like a stone in still water. "We were called boys when we were carrying our mothers on our backs, when we were burying our friends, when we were learning to lead without ever being taught. No one dared move. You call me boy," he said finally, "but you don't know what that word means where I come from. There, boys carry nations." The audience held its breath. Karoline shifted in her seat, but she didn't speak. Her hand twitched toward her mic, but she didn't raise it. Someone in the front row wiped a tear. Then another. The moderator looked. Shaken, struggling to hold the moment, but it was beyond him now. Karoline finally leaned forward to speak, but as soon as she opened her mouth, a wave of cold silence hit her from the crowd. Not one person wanted to hear her right now. Then, from the third row, a tall man in a veteran's jacket slowly stood up. A U.S. Marine, older, with ribbons on his chest and pain in his eyes. He placed his hand over his heart and spoke firmly. "That wasn't debate," he said, voice rough with emotion. "That was humiliation." And he rose above it. He walked forward without asking. No one stopped him. He reached the stage, stood in front of Traore, and saluted. The two men looked at each other for a moment. Then Traore stood and took his hand. The studio burst into applause. Not loud and wild, but steady, full of weight. The kind of clapping that comes from respect, not excitement. But the moment wasn't over. From the back of the audience, a quiet voice called out, "Excuse me." An elderly black woman stood, hands shaking slightly. Her voice was soft, but it carried. "I didn't come here to speak," she said, "but I need to say something." Everyone turned toward her. She looked directly at Traore, her eyes full of something that couldn't be described, only felt. "My son wore the same uniform," she said, nodding toward the veteran. "He fought in Afghanistan, came home in a box." Her voice cracked. "They called him Boy, too," she whispered, "even in uniform." The room froze. Her pain was raw and real. It cut through every camera, every light, every layer of media gloss. "When you spoke," she said, tears now on her cheeks, "it felt like he stood up again." She didn't sit right away. No one moved. No one dared. Even Karoline was still. All the smugness had drained from her face. She wasn't the star anymore. She was the shadow. There was no follow-up question, no counterpoint. No attempt to shift the moment into something else. Because everyone knew something true had been said in that room. Something that didn't need to be argued. Just heard. The days after that broadcast felt different. Across the country, people weren't just talking, they were thinking. Traore's words weren't just replayed, they were felt. News anchors paused longer before speaking. Church sermons opened with his quote. Teachers used his speech in class. It wasn't just news anymore, it was something else. Something that stuck. Headlines shifted. Not from outrage to gossip, but from gossip to reflection. What we learned from Traore. Dignity in the age of division. When silence spoke loudest. The same networks that once thrived on controversy were now slowing down to replay each word line by line. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt disappeared from screens. For a while, her team tried to fight it. They called it overreaction, political targeting, a smear campaign, but none of it worked. Her voice started vanishing from talk shows. Her donors grew quiet. Even her closest allies began to distance themselves. Her once fiery words became a punchline. She was no longer seen as bold, just bitter. In time, she quietly announced a temporary leave from public life. But most understood her influence was gone. Back in Burkina Faso, things were different. Traore wasn't holding press conferences or chasing attention. He simply kept doing the work he had always done, but his speech had crossed oceans. In schools across West Africa, teachers played it for their students. Young boys and girls listened with wide eyes. Posters went up in classrooms with one line under his picture. "We carry nations on our backs." That phrase spread like wildfire. Not as a slogan, but as a promise. A promise that dignity isn't something given, it's something lived. And Traore had lived it, without shouting, without insult, without revenge. He didn't become a celebrity. He became something rarer, respected. And in America, far from the stage where it all began, his voice kept echoing. Janitor in Cleveland sat in the break room, watching the clip again on his phone, not for the news, but for how it made him feel. A little girl in Texas, too young to understand politics, wrote one word across her notebook in big letters: dignity. A white veteran, the same man who stood in the studio, printed out Traore's quote and taped it to his fridge. You don't need to know where Burkina Faso is to understand dignity. Because that's what stayed with people. Not the argument, not the moment of insult, but the way one man stood, calm, still full of something that couldn't be broken by noise. And maybe that's what people remembered most. Not who won, but who stood tall without needing to rise.